So today we have another seminar in a series that we started about almost a year ago when I began with the planetary limits presentation. And we have since then had discussions by people like Alan Emery on the anthropogenic or Anthropocene and the difficulty of dealing with the energy issue and transforming in the Anthropocene. We've had Art Hunter talking about microgrids and the electrification of modern society and the trends going in that direction. Today, we're going to hear from Mike Nickerson on a somewhat amusing title, but a very serious topic. And that topic is about the need to change our business model, if you like, of how the world operates. Our so-called business as usual and the consumer orientation of our society, and that's the global society, is really unsustainable in regard to staying on this planet. So Mike's notion is more fun, less stuff. And that will be the topic that we will cover. Before I turn it over to Mike, though, I'd just like to mention that our next conversation will be on the, I think it's the 21st of October. If it's not, the date will appear, but it will be Bob Walker, or Robert Walker, former CEO of Canadian Nuclear Labs. And he'll be talking about Canada's nuclear energy pathways to net zero, opportunities and challenges. And it's October the 12th. So that'll be posted soon. Bob has already supplied me with his background material and the abstract for the presentation. And then that'll be followed at a date yet to be set, but it will be Peter Chapman, who was just talking briefly about quantum a few minutes ago. He's going to be talking to us about the quantum world. And his views about it. He has some rather interesting views that are not part of the not mainstream, and I think it will be useful to have a discussion around his views because they are quite outside the mainstream, if I could put it that way, but based on many others before him who have also taken a somewhat similar position. So if there's no further questions, comments, or interruptions to be had here, this small number, let us proceed. So, Mike, I give the floor to you, and I might point out that Mike is going to be a show and tell kind of presentation. There's no slide deck here. It's a conversation and storytelling, and he's got some props. So over to you, Mike. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm pleased to be here. More fun, less stuff is more of a synopsis of what I have to say. The title of my book, Life, Money, and Illusion, Living on Earth as If We Want to Stay, is more descriptive of the overall topic, but the punchline will come later in what I have to present. My origin in all of this stuff was to find myself as an adult human being and recognizing the incredible capacities that being human offers and wondering what to do with it. And I got the idea that I would ask people who are working in voluntary or nonprofit groups what motivated them. I thought they were better sources of direction than people who are doing it for the money, because you never know quite what's motivating them. So I spent 4 months just traveling around Canada and the US, looking up community groups and asking them what were the problems they saw, what were the solutions they were working on. Came back to Toronto at the time, and I got together with another group of young people that were looking at peace and environment issues, and we set up what we call the Institute for the Study of Cultural Evolution, which was just a flag saying we're interested in what people are seeing in terms of problems and solutions. We moved to Toronto, or to Ottawa rather, and at one point there was 20 of us in 3 rented houses, not just talking with environmental groups and development groups, nonprofit groups, basically, but also any literature that they thought was credible. So we spent 4 years studying all this stuff and making notes and discussing it. And we wanted to get land. We wanted to do what's now called eco-village, but we were barely paying the rent, so we didn't get a capital accumulation for land, and the group disbanded. I took all of the notes from that study and boiled them down to 8 key points, which I should have shared with you ahead of time. 3 of them, renewable energy, cyclic use of material things, and living with what we have as our human potentials are the 3 things that are possible in the long term. And, the usual things of renewable and non-renewable resources, species, equity issues, and the like were the problems. What when I took this definition around, started talking with people about it, one person said, "Oh, this is the definition of sustainability," and it struck me. It makes sense. The ability to sustain in 1974, sustainability wasn't a word really that was being used much. And I wondered, why would a study of voluntary and nonprofit groups give you a definition of sustainability? And what I came to realize is that the voluntary nonprofit inertia or inspiration is the natural immune system of society. If you cut yourself, the cells nearby notice the problem, they start to heal it, right? If there's a problem in society, the people nearby notice and they start to try to set it right. And if they can, they do. If they can't, they talk to their friends and their families and they form groups and they lobby government and all the things that voluntary and nonprofit groups do. So the problems and solutions of facing humanity are naturally perceived by this really vast network of voluntary and nonprofit groups. And the problems and solutions are still pretty much the same. Climate change, of course, has risen up through the ranks to be a mind-boggling reason to pay attention, but they were all there in the early 70s. A fundamental change is necessary in the relationship between people and the earth, and I'm sure you folks know this. The idea that if you teach a person to fish, they can, eat, or if you give a person a fish, they can eat for a day, right? If you teach them to fish, they can eat for their lifetime. If you teach a whole population to fish, you can deplete the fish stock. And that's a different thing. Up and until the 70s, sometime before, for some resources, it didn't matter how much of something we were consuming. You need something, you invest in getting it, and you get it. And that was pretty straightforward. But when we started to touch the limits of various resources, how much we invested was no longer what determined how much you could get. How much existed was what determined. So we were limited by the planetary limits that we're knowing so much about these days. So that shift from we can get anything we invest in to we can only get what the planet can sustainably offer is the fundamental shift in the human experience that we have to bring about. And clearly the mainstream order, we were talking about corporations and their continual search for for profit and expansion growth, are not paying attention to limited resources, and that's a problem. What happened with the fish is happening with forests and fossil fuels and fresh water and the ability to do many things on the planet. So the change is necessary across the board. How do you get a civilization that's been growing for 10,000 years to realize it's grown up now? And the getting bigger is no longer what we need to do. And this is, what we've been poking at with our question of direction for many years. And I know the Club of Rome and your group as well are saying, how do you put on the brakes, right? And clearly with fossil fuels, we need to remove the additional carbon dioxide, stop putting more in. But if we were magically, or even through an enormous industrial process, able to replace all the fossil fuels with renewable energy, we would still be overwhelming the planet. The overshoot phenomena is not just carbon dioxide, although that's the critical current state. We need to deal with these other things. There's two limitations on the planet. One is the limitation of availability. It's the law of the minimum, it's called. And that's, if you need fossil fuels, say, and you need it in certain quantity and it's no longer available in those quantities, that will limit the expansion of what you're doing. They had a problem in New Zealand where they could grow sheep, but they weren't reproducing. And they studied the soil and stuff and discovered there was a lack of cobalt in the soil. And they introduced that to the feed or the local, growing stuff. And sure enough, the sheep were able to reproduce. So they had a minimum there of the amount of cobalt they needed in order to run their full life cycle. And until that was available in the quantity, it couldn't happen. The other is the law of tolerance. How much of an organism's waste can be tolerated? How much of our waste as humans can we tolerate? Best example of that is yeast in fruit juice. You put yeast into the fruit juice and it starts to digest the sugars and turn it into alcohol. And as the level of alcohol rises up to 14%, the yeast can't tolerate alcohol at 14% and it dies. So you won't find a naturally occurring alcohol at much greater than 14% unless it's been refined, distilled, or in some way, made more potent. So if we can recognize the law of the minimum and the law of tolerance and recognize it, we'll be in better shape. They are, indelible laws of nature, and we will be tried in the court of natural selection if we don't obey the law in the long run. But human beings have got what it takes. Like, we're a totally amazing species. We got thumbs, right? And they let us do all sorts of interesting things. We've got pretty good senses, not like an eagle can see a mouse in the grass a mile up in the sky, but we've got telescopes and we've got microscopes. We can see to the center atoms and the edge of the universe, and all manner of other sensory devices to augment normal senses that allow us to see the Earth on a great, broad spectrum of information. And we've got the capacity to take that information and recognize the patterns and see how they're working and how we can work with it. And we can communicate. Somebody can spend a lifetime studying something, get it, and then share it with the world overnight, or, just in a matter of, not very long period of time, that information can go out and become a part of how other people see the world. So this is not an organism that we expect will sacrifice its young on the altar of perpetual profit, but remains to be seen. As we were discussing the corporate charter's requirement to make returns for shareholders, we're up against quite a problem. So why do we have to grow? Like, why does the system have to grow? Like, if it's not growing, we have hard times, recessions, depressions, people lose jobs and homes and things break up. The most structural reason that I've come across is the nature of how our money is created. And to get a good sense of this, I'll tell you a little story first about 4 cowboys who've been out on the range all day, and they're hot and they're tired and thirsty, and they want to go to the bar, drink beer, and play cards before they go home. So they go to the bar, they order their beer, and they ask the bartender, "Can we borrow a deck of cards?" And the bartender says, "Sure, I'll lend you a deck of cards, but I want you to give me your holster, your saddle, or something as collateral to make sure you'll give me back the cards. I'll give you each 13 cards, but at the end of the day, I want you each to give me back 14 cards, 1 extra for interest." So, the mathematicians amongst you may determine that to see that there's going to be a problem coming here. What that has to do with our economic system is, if you need some money for a business and you go to the bank, you've got a business plan, it's brilliant, you need $100,000. Banker says, "Sure, we'll give you that." The banker doesn't go to the vault and get you $100,000 of depositor's money. He just writes you a line of credit. All of a sudden, there's $100,000 you can draw on in your account to pay, for help, for a place to work, for tools, whatever it is your business needs. And the people receiving that money can spend it on whatever they want. That's how money goes into circulation through loans. A very small portion, 4 or 5%, is coins and bills that are manufactured and sent out for making change. The problem is that when the banker created that $100,000, he wants $110,000 back, or whatever the interest charge amounts to. And he didn't create the extra $10,000. So unless somebody else takes out another loan to put more money in circulation, there's not enough to pay back the principal and the interest. And that's, broad millions of loans and things. But basically, if there's not more money being created each year than is paid back, then things, some people can't make the money they need to pay their interest, and they go bankrupt, and businesses go down, people lose jobs, lose homes, families break up, all those hard times. And it can be the greatest volumes of goods and services ever produced in history. This year, say, is one of these amazing years. We grew by, well, we'll see, they're questioning it somewhat, but normal years, you grow by so much, and it's more economic exchange than has ever taken place in history before. If the next year is the same record amount of exchange, but not more, we go into recession. We have hard times, and that's just ludicrous. And this is part of what got me, studying economics and ecological economics, because I know we have to stabilize. We can't continually expand, and the monetary system is at the key of that. There are other ways to manage money. And a really illuminating example is a little town called Wara in Austria after the Second World War. They were a defeated country, and after the First World War, and the Depression was on. So they were in a really, really hard economic shape. And this one town took a bunch of the federal money and put it in the bank and created a stamp script, which was a paper money in the name of the town. They put money in the bank to cover it so they wouldn't be accused of creating the money themselves, right? They just said this is equivalent to. But it required a stamp periodically, I think monthly or something, to keep its value. And that cost a little bit of money. So when you got paid, your money is worth the most right when you get paid. If you hold on to it, like people tend to in economic uncertain times, then you keep paying on it and it becomes worth less and less. So people would spend it on something, paint the house. They need to upgrade their tools. That town repaved the streets, they painted up the buildings, they reforested, they got the agricultural systems working, all at the depth of the Depression, with people trading this paper currency. And they found that currency was being used 14 times for each single time that currency was being used in the other towns. So it's not the money that makes humanity prosper. It's our ability to do things and our willingness to trade with each other. So, if we're all being creative, we create the world around us. If we're waiting for this federal tender to be available, then we're dependent on, the system that provides it and its availability to us. So it's good to know that we have the capacity to do this stuff. It's so money is essentially the blood of society. In your body, your blood feeds your mind, your muscles give you action, your gut gives you the nourishment you need, and lungs give you oxygen. The blood is circulating between all these parts, making you an integral organism. In society, some people are growing food, some people are educating, some people are entertaining, some people are building things, and money circulates between all these different activities, making society an integral whole. So the one of the obstacles that we have to overcome is the honor and respect that we tend to give to people with lots of money. Like billionaires are all the rage, right? And they even measure, how many new billionaires were created this year, and thinking that that's a good thing. And it dates back to Adam Smith's day, when he was sort of writing down what the capitalist system was like. If you were to make a lot of money in those days, it meant that you had made a lot of goods or provided a lot of services, and people paid you for those things. So if you were paid a lot, it meant you were providing a lot of goods and services. So if somebody had a lot of money, then clearly they had been a great benefit to society. So that value system and that respect sort of got imprinted on society at that point. With the sort of technologies that are being used to work the stock market and to out compete smaller competitors, and all the sort of things, you could say that the invisible hand of the market is maximizing its competitive advantage and picking pockets. It's people can make vast fortunes, and they actually are undermining the well-being of society as compared to expanding the well-being. And that part has to do with the Earth's limitations, because traditionally and up until a certain point, if you needed that extra wealth to fill in the growth thing, you just went out and found a new forest or new soil fertility or something like that to be able to create the wealth to keep that thing going. But now that we're sort of covering the territory, more often than not, you have to take resources from other people in order to continue growing. So the wealth, rich-poor divide is expanding rapidly, because that's the most, one of the best places you can get money is now to take advantage of people that you can take advantage of. Capitalist accumulation, this whole notion of assembling a whole lot of money. Back when industrialism was getting underway, if you wanted to make shoes and you wanted an industrial process to make shoes, you needed enough capital to get a building, to have machines designed and built, to train people how to use them, to get the materials to work. You make a bunch of shoes. All of that had to be paid for before you can get the shoes to the market and start getting some income. And that gets paid for by capital. So if you've accumulated a lot of capital, then you can set up a business to provide something. And industrial processes are much more cost effective than hand labor. So pots and pans and food and all sorts of things have been industrialized. And now these accumulations of money, of course, have continued to grow. I remember when the first $1 billion takeover was announced. Like, this was a big thing. We could hardly imagine it. Musk paid $44 billion for Twitter. And I saw something the other day that sounded like they'd spent $200 billion to buy some big company. Like, the big fish are eating little fish, and the enormous fish are eating the big fish. And eventually we're going to end up where the board game Monopoly is supposed to end up if you play it out to the final conclusion. And has anybody here not played Monopoly? Generally, almost everybody plays it at some point. Not everybody goes back and plays it again. But not many people have read the rules. And according to the rules, the game is not over until everything that was gathered, that was earned by the other players in the early stage of the game, have been mortgaged and lost to the winner. And when the winner has it all, then the game is officially over. Now, we recognize, most people playing the game, at some point you see this person is clearly going to win. They've got the properties, they've got the money, and we're losing. And you quit the game and you do something else. We're at the stage in the global Monopoly game where we recognize who's won. We ought to congratulate them, pass out some prizes, pack up the game, and play something else. And clearly the game we have to play is sustainability. The growth game is no longer working, and indeed it endangers the well-being of our whole system. So how about the change? So just before I said I've got two sections. Like, there's a economic section, which is mostly what I've been sharing with you now, and then there's a life section, and they're closely related, but they're not completely. So I thought we might do some questions if there's anything about the economic structure before I go on to the life thing. I just want to clarify, like, if you're defining what an economy is, it's a system of mutual provision, right? It's not the flow of money, it's our ability to make things and our willingness to trade. And if we are mutually providing the different things that we do to each other, then we can make a strong society and decide that we're not going to grow until we drop. So if there's any questions around that aspect, we can take some time on that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So yes, he's divided this presentation into two parts. So there's this initial discussion that if there's any questions or comments you'd like to make, good time to interject now. I see Gordon maybe has something to say.
Yeah, this is first of all, economists, certainly it's not conventional to regard currency as the only aspect. I don't know. We have economists in our group. I'm not an economist, but as far as I know, that's not the modern way of looking at an economy. But I think the main failure of what's it called, neoliberalism, which is the dominant economic paradigm in the United States, at least, is that it doesn't value people. It doesn't treat people as assets. And people are assets. And we are the most successful species on the planet in terms of reaching all the different environments we could reach because we're different from each other. So it's not just that people are valuable, like units churned out on a production line, but they're valuable because they're different from each other, different skills, different attitudes, different ways of looking at the world, which turn out to be useful for different purposes, because in the end, everything we do is scavenging. Mm-hmm. And to be a good scavenger, you need a lot of different perspectives in your society, and of course communication is is absolutely vital to that, because we're good at communication. We can help each other scavenge, and we can use that. So I don't know. There's economists. I haven't kept up with it at all, but there are economists who are working on a more of an ecological perspective, and I believe that's where we should be going. And I
Yeah.
think
I spent some years working on what was called the Canada Wellbeing Measurement Act, which was an attempt to get a genuine progress index established in Canada. To support the notion that money is central. Everybody's goal, or all government's goal, is to expand the GDP, which is that's the fixation. There's lots of elements, but a genuine progress index would, first of all, it would differentiate between money made creating, growing food, and money made cleaning up after car accidents. It all goes into the GDP account right now, and that's ludicrous. But it also measures environmental and social factors as well. So it's I can send a link to that for later, because we did quite a lot of work. We actually got a resolution passed in the House of Commons that, in the opinion of the House, the government should set up such a system, but the government didn't. That's where I discovered that government wasn't the House of Commons. Government was the Prime Minister, the ministers, and their parliamentary assistants. And House of Commons was there to make suggestions and debate stuff. But it was quite interesting, as everybody had an interest in measuring. It didn't matter if they came in sandals or had a pinstripe suit. They had issues they were concerned about and thought it was a good idea to have a metric that says whether this is getting better or deteriorating. And it still would be a great thing to do. There was a major effort, a guy named Ron Coleman, who was instrumental in Bhutan's Index of Human Happiness, and the Atlantic GPI, Genuine Progress Index. He and the King of Nepal and various other folks got to the United Nations with the intent of trying to get this established, and they just got basically run out. Bhutan was threatened that if they go ahead and push this, that they will no longer get international monetary aid. So there's forces that don't want to have us measuring social and environmental indicators, but it would be a great advancement if we did.
Well, it would be.
Steve, I see you made a comment in the chat. Did you want to elaborate on that? Maybe he can't hear. Anyone else want to raise a point now? Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really liked the little anecdote about the Austrian village, which I hadn't heard before, but it takes me back to my early days of learning economics when I was an engineering student at the University of London, and we had a visiting professor from the London School of Economics give us the course that we had to take in the third year undergrad on economics. And we were students who'd studied control theory. And the reality was that this lady, she had no idea about what we call feedback. In other words, what when governments spend money, it comes back to them and that sort of thing. When we raised this with her, we basically were told we didn't know what we were talking about. And so all that to say that I have a problem with the traditional economists not understanding the very simple basis of feedback taxation, income tax, sales tax, and so on. The more money a government spends, the more of it that comes back to them, which is what you mentioned in that story about the Austrian village. And I think one of the problems that we have today is that the world, and I mean the world, the general population, the voting population, and the politicians who basically do what they think the voting population wants rather than what they should do, simply believes that if a government isn't solvent the way a human an individual has to be solvent, then that's a problem for the economy. And in my opinion, it shows a complete misunderstanding of the importance or the lack of it of money, which is what you absolutely alluded to. That's simply my observation.
Any comment on that, Mike?
It's the people who say that a government should be run like a business, the business has to borrow its money and has to pay it back. The government could create the money if it's a sovereign state. And that debt to the government is actually a public asset. when they spend money in the economy, it circulates around. It gives us currency to work with. It's not, it's not critical that that be paid back in the same way it is if you borrow money as an individual or a company. Barbara's
go ahead. Yeah, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of points. A long time ago, I read a book called The Spirit Level, which
Yes.
sort of, I don't know if that, talks about societies are happiest when people are more equal. Doesn't matter if they have a little or they have a lot, but it's the disparity that leads to,
Yeah.
problems and whatnot. And the other thing is just a personal thing. A friend of mine, Garvin Boyle, is working on this ecology thing, but I've never delved into, he's a mathematician, delved into what exactly he does. And I don't know if you've encountered him. There's some group that's working on it. His name is Garvin Boyle. No,
rings a bell, but I haven't seen his stuff.
Okay. That's my
There
Is he in
is
the
there
public
is a,
sector? Is he public sector, not for profit, or academia?
Well, he's retired now. He did work for the government for a while for different, but this is on a different stuff he's sort of doing on this. He was working with the Chinese for a long time, actually, too, on these same ideas.
they have a model called win-win. I did a talk in Ottawa to a Rotary Club that one of the people there was the Canada-China Friendship Society, and she took one of my books and gave it to an economist there, and wrote back and said what they were working on was this notion of an economy where everybody wins. And
Yeah.
as compared to the winner take all, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, it's just a comment on the remark there about government running a country the way a business runs a business. And to my mind, you've got to be very careful there. A lot of it makes no sense. I mean, if you're running a business and times get tough and you need more profit, sure, you can lay off people, you can cut out areas of the business that are not producing much in the way of revenue, and you can get by without the short term. You cannot apply that to a country, because if you try to do so and you throw a whole bunch of people out of work, you've still got those people in the country, and it benefits nobody to have them standing around on street corners while the few who are in work are working faster and faster, just trying to keep up. This is simply not the way to use resources the way they should be used. It's a complete fallacy to talk about running a country the way that you run a business in that respect.
Hear, hear.
That's a good point. Anybody else want to add anything at this moment? And otherwise, I'll turn it back to Mike to stage 2.
And we can carry on with questions of all sorts after I finish that part.
Sure enough. Okay, go ahead then, Mike.
Okay, well, life is much more exciting than economics.
Here. The dull science.
Yeah, there's 2 stories that I tell in this connection that anybody who comes to our project here, very few of them get away without seeing these stories. First one's about a fellow named Jean-Baptiste von Helmont. He was a scientist in the 1600s as science was re-emerging from the Middle Ages, and he was studying life in what's now the Netherlands. And he did an experiment where he took a branch from a willow tree that weighed 5 pounds, dried a whole bunch of soil bone dry, and put exactly 200 pounds in a great big pot, and then watered it with rainwater or distilled water. He put perforated metal over the top so the air could circulate, but dust wouldn't settle on the soil. Watered it with rainwater or distilled water, and the branch put down roots and grew up into a bush. And at the end of 5 years, he separated the plant from the soil and weighed it and found that it had grown to 169 pounds. And then he dried the soil bone dry again and weighed it and found that it lost less than 2 ounces. So there's 164 pounds of growth from less than 2 ounces of soil. And the rest is carbon from the air and oxygen and hydrogen from air and water. Most of life is a gas. And I mean that in 2 ways. In the context of the story, most of the physical substance that we build our physical beings from floats freely in the atmosphere almost everywhere on Earth. It's not scarce material, not scarce resource. The other side of the pun is that we're facing the most serious challenges that humanity's ever faced. And the single most potent thing that you can do to help deal with those problems is to enjoy yourself. If you get your satisfaction from relating with people, learning stuff, helping out, appreciating what's going on, sport, music, dance, the things that we do with life, you can get all the fulfillment you can handle without needing anything more from the natural world than what it takes to get through the day in any case, right? Some food and some shelter, and that's, and we can have very rewarding lives on a very small portion of the amount of material that we currently use. So the other, that 2 ounces of soil or so that helps to also be accounted for. Imagine you guys are familiar with Buckminster Fuller. He was very active back in our younger days, and tremendous inspiration for me. I read his book, An Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, back when I was in my early 20s. And he said, if we want to be successful on the planet, we need to treat it like a spaceship. We know that there's only so much provisions on board a spaceship. There's only so much room to throw our garbage. And we need energy, and we've got a great star at just the right distance. And that's it. And if we build our human systems to live within those design criteria, we can cruise the universe on spaceship Earth for the indefinite future. So this inspired me. And years later, when he was talking at the University of Guelph, I was in Toronto with our group of people. And we went up to listen to him. And for 3 hours, he was just spouting ideas, lots and lots of ideas. But one that struck with me, and I've carried a string in my pocket ever since, is something he called pattern integrity, which he illustrated with a slip knot on a piece of string. So as the knot slides down the string, matter enters one end and passes out the other. And that carries on until there's absolutely nothing in the knot now that was in it when you first saw it. But it's the same knot. It's got integrity as a knot. It's not about the material, it's the form. And all of us, we're pattern integrity. The physical substance of our body changes all the time. Most of it changes in a year. In 7 years, there's practically not a trace of any of the substance that we were composed of 7 years previously. But we're the same person. We're spirits enmeshed in the stuff of the earth. And if you think about all of the substance that'll enter your skin and say, this is me, from the moment of your conception to the day that you die, all of that is you. Only a small portion inside your skin right now, but all of that is you at one point and another. That's called your long body. It's your character and your substance over the course of your lifetime. And the vast majority of it is in the environment, in the biomass right now. The long bodies of every person, every plant, animal, insect, everything that lives draws on the same biomass to build their physical forms. So one of the first things we need to do as a mature species is get toilet trained. It's totally unacceptable to take things that are dangerous to life and to release them into the biomass from which all life builds its forms. So if we take the ends of the rope and we join them together, this is what organic agriculture is about. You take the kitchen waste, the garden waste, the human waste, and you rot it all down. The soil, the bacteria and fungus that change it to humus, you put it in the soil, the life goes crazy and produces food that the plants can eat, and then we can eat the plants, or animals eat the plants, and we can eat the animals. Those nutrients can cycle endlessly through local soils. So a community that establishes a relationship with local soil has the capacity to sustain itself over time. Most of our substance growth passes around in the air, and the rest we can manage in local soils. Conventional agriculture is an enormous mining and processing and distribution scam. Natural gas is the source of most of the nitrogen we use. It's an incredibly unsustainable system, and not to mention the damage that just using in major nutrients does to soil life. And that whole thing, it's necessary to reconnect with soil. And it's interesting in the carbon sequestration discussion, there's a lot of people that are saying, yeah, if we treat the soil well, it will absorb carbon and build up carbon and take it out of the atmosphere. So there's some hope on that basis for becoming more responsible with how we manage the nutrient elements that we so much depend on. And of course, the collective human organism, what one of the K-Course speakers called Homo colossus, unfortunately, the gargantuan one that's sort of consuming the planet, is the same metabolism process. I picked up a piece of slag at a railway track because they often use it for the rail beds. And I showed it to people. I said, this is civilization shit, right? Like they eat up rocks and they digest out the iron or the cobalt or whatever the mineral that or metal that they're looking for. And all of the non-usable stuff gets pooped out as clinker, you know, and it accumulates. It's just the nature of the collective human organism to have a metabolism similar to how we do it. We just bring in a lot of minerals and other metals and things like that to build this gargantuan superstructure that we live by. So what we've done originally with this this project, you know, working with this outline of sustainability, the question of direction program, which was saying that, you know, it's clear that we can't continue with the perpetual expansion thing forever. So we need to aim towards sustainability. And the outline, you know, is pretty clear what is and what isn't sustainable, and just sort of stimulating people to think about it and try to choose. And again, I'll send some links to that. I'm sorry I didn't do it beforehand because it would be handy just to have the reference there. But we've been you know, beating that drum for a long time, and every now and then I come across somebody that's we've got these little cards that how does it work there? It's a question of direction, and it basically says, you know, if it's you know, if our biggest problems are resulting from our size, it doesn't make sense to continue trying to grow, and then outlines the sustainability outline on the back. We've put out 800,000 of those or so, and occasionally bump into people that have got it. And fortunately, there's a lot of people looking at the same problematique of human beings confronting planetary limits. So some of the stuff that you had to dig around a lot to find information on is everyday news now, and there's a lot of fronts that it's happening. But how do we coalesce that into something that society makes its purpose? Instead of growing, our purpose is to minimize natural resource consumption and maximize the amount of satisfaction we can get from living. It's a very different sort of society. But when you look at life-based pursuits, which are these, you know, things that you do with life, like relating and learning and sport and all that stuff, that's what people did until the consumer age. It took industrial processes to get so built up that there was a surplus, and we had to be trained to want that surplus. You know, we have food, we have shelter, but at a certain point you've got what you need. But you had to create wants that you know, people would continue to buy stuff, or that industrial expansion couldn't happen. But before that, life-based activity was what people did. You know, you do what you have to do, your work, and you'd relate with your family or your friends, or you'd, you know, pursue some hobby. Or there's you know, there's lots of precedent for human beings to be able to find their satisfaction in living. We don't really need all of this stuff. Although the Jevons paradox is a major bump in the road, that you know, you become much more efficient at burning gasoline in cars, and all of a sudden people drive more, right? I make furniture to support myself, has been my studying writing habit, supported by custom furniture, and often asked to make shelves, and often making shelves for our own consumption. And it doesn't matter how much shelving you get, it gets filled up. It doesn't matter how many lanes of highway you make up, it gets filled up with cars. You know, the LED lights, you know, are way more efficient than the old incandescent, so people use 100 times as many. This is a problem. You know, we don't get more efficient, we get more consumptive, and this is the challenge. And one of the ways to address a societal shift is by tweaking legitimacy. What does it mean to be a good human being? And a good way to understand this, why that's so important, is if you imagine taking a pack-sack full of tools and going into the wilderness with the intent of staying there by yourself for 2 years, what are the chances of coming out in good health, right? And that's even at the prime of our lives. And that's with tools that other people made, that other people designed and made, and the knowledge of how to use those that we would have learned from our society before we went off. You know, even the words and the concepts we think with, we learn from people in our society. Without a society, a person is like a computer without an operating system. There's a tremendous potential, but if we don't have that understanding that our species is collected and shared over the eons, we can't do anything. So we want to belong. And the price of admission is to subscribe to the value systems of society. If society says your goal is to earn and spend as much money as possible, that's what people try to do, to be good citizens, right? When we shift the legitimacy where to be a good citizen, our job is to live lightly in the material world, to get as much satisfaction as we possibly can from living, and to manage the world in a way that serves the generations that are following. When that legitimacy starts to penetrate the consciousness, then people will start to live lightly, enjoy life, and manage the material world rationally, to be good citizens and to belong. How we do that, perhaps your network can be helpful in trying to move that forward. We found this more fun, less stuff notion is particularly memorable. You know, we've got these stickers that we send to people and pass out with, just to get the meme in people's minds. Because basically what more fun means is let's shift towards an economy that takes care of people and ecosystems. And less stuff means let's shift away from an economy that wants to expand perpetually the amount of stuff that's being produced, used, and thrown away. So it's simple to pass on the meme, and once you've got that, then we can start to push a little stronger on the economic shift that has to take place. Now, one of the things that came up, not super often, but frequently enough in my studies, is the whole notion of meditation. And I don't know how many of you folks have a meditation process or have experimented with that. But the best explanation I've heard of meditation is that if you picture yourself on the side of a lake, and on the far side of the lake, there's an individual that is totally knowing, it's compassionate, and wants nothing better than to answer any questions you might have. But the only way that that person can communicate is to throw pebbles in the water and to let the ripples cross the lake to you. The lake is our mind. And as long as our mind is busy, the waves on the lake make it so that the ripples can't come across. But if we can bring our mind to a stasis, then we can get that information. And that translates in a couple ways. There's you know, just the process of our subconscious mind. You may have had the experience when you have problems with your computer and you ask somebody who knows and they explain that problem, and then they want to say, oh, look at this and look at this, and there's this next thing that, you know, they want to teach you all sorts of stuff, and at a certain point you go, thanks, you know, I got this problem solved. I was working away one day and my computer jammed up for some reason, and a little voice, I tried to calm myself and just, what am I going to do? And this little voice in me tried, try this, right? And I tried it and it worked. And all I can figure is that while I couldn't consciously grasp all this information that was being passed to me, it went into my subconscious. And when I quieted my conscious mind, my subconscious was able to pass that information back to me. Another extension that's a little less absolute is the notion of morphic fields, morphogenetic fields. Rupert Sheldrake is the sort of pioneer of this. He was studying genetics and how the genetic information has enough information for a whole organism to grow out of one fertilized egg. And they couldn't find enough information source in the genes. So they started to work with the notion that maybe there's a field of information that resonates with our genetic code. So monarch butterflies know how to get to South America and know how to get back, even though it takes them 3 generations to get back. They know because they tap into monarch butterflyness, and the geese know which way to go because they've got the geeseness. And everything that human beings do would presumably be available in this territory. And again, a calm mind is the best way to tap into that. Sheldrake has experiments where, you know, some things that were very difficult to do, crystallizing certain compounds. It was hard to do, they couldn't do it. But once it happened in one place, then they found that other labs could do it more easily in another place. And maybe that's just that when you understand it, it's easier to communicate and easier for people to pick up. But whatever it is, this is a source that we can tap into to bring about the sort of changes that have to change. And I know we've had in the K-Corps a number, Bill Reese, and I forget who the other guy was that coined Homo colossus. There's lots of reasons to be pessimistic about the human family sort of turning around, which means we're going to overshoot and collapse. But still, it's worth our while to bring the information and the understandings that the best information we have, and to spread it into the population because there will be some people that sort of come up from the dust, and it may be hot, or they may be in a place that's, benefits from certain circumstances. But if they've got an understanding of what sustainability is, then that mythology will be part of what enables them to recreate some form of society that's a little more practical than the one that they'll be recovering from. So I just got two more stories, and then we can get back to some discussion. One is just often people use the butterfly metamorphosis as a example of how the change happens, and I've used it many times. And I've had 3 occasions where microbiologists, people studying metamorphosis at the cellular level, added to the story. Inside the cocoon or the chrysalis, the first cells of the caterpillar that become butterfly are actually attacked by the immune system of the caterpillar. The caterpillar doesn't feel so good, something's happening, it wants to maintain the established order, right? About a year later, another one said, well, after a while, a bunch of cells have become butterfly, and they band together, they're imaginal cells, and they're resistant to the immune system of the caterpillar. It's sort of like our small organization saying, we're supposed to go and earn and spend more money, but we're on to something, leave us alone, we'll carry on. So you've got the mutual support of the people in your society, your group, that are looking at these solutions and are willing to consider them and work with them. And then the final guy, it was several years later, says that after the form of the butterfly is pretty well established, all of the rest of the protoplasm of the caterpillar flows into the form of the butterfly. And that's the point where it's so clear that there is a possibility for humanity that we can create, that the wealth and the talent and the abilities of the human family can all flow into that to make the change happen. It's a long shot, given like what we talked about corporate log jams and so on, but people are more and more realizing that we're in deep trouble and we need to do something. So spread the stories as best we can. So I've got a last story about my granddaughter. I was actually it was January 5th, back in 2006. I got a call from my daughter in the morning. She says, "Dad, you're a granddad." And it was a rush. I knew she was huge at Christmas time, and wasn't surprised, but it was wonderful. I remembered back to when she was a baby, when she was 2 years old, put her little arms around my neck and called me daddy. And it was the first clue I'd had that I'd grown up. I was just charging through life. We clearly had a place, and, we got her fed, and she got to the point where she could talk. But, I graduated. I was now a parent, right? And so when my daughter tells me I'm a granddad, that's another graduation. So this is a story about my granddaughter, Lillian, the one that was born on January 5th. And about when she's a grandmother telling stories to her grandchildren. Because the change will have taken place by the time she's a grandmother. The current economic system, to be healthy, needs to grow at about 20% a year. That's a doubling time in 20 years, or no, 3% a year, sorry, double the time in 20 years. So by the time she's a mom, the economy should be double what it is now. And by the time she's a grandmother, it should be 4 times what it is, right? It's not going to happen. Something serious is going to happen. So she's going to be telling stories to her grandchildren. And what we don't know about the story is, will it be a story of denial and disaster? Or will it be a story of creativity and celebration? And the difference depends on how thoroughly we can get the vision of a world that can work into the population at large. And I certainly thank Peter for arranging this opportunity to share it with your group.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for a very interesting and provocative presentation. I think you've stirred a lot of thoughts in many of us, all of us, in fact.